sharp, ragged breath, the heavy, sliding crunch of boots losing traction on loose shale. A low whisper follows. Okay, Abe, just breathe. Don't look at the fog. Look at your feet. There it is again. Above me. That heel drag. That slow metal click. Like a pole tip finding a rock. And there it is below me, too. Same second. Same sound. Like the mountains got two of whatever's hunting me. One on each lip of this gap. And they're keeping time with each other like a pair of hands clapping on either side of my skull. I cut the switchback. I know I cut it. 40 years telling folks not to. And I went and did the one thing I swore I never would. The laurel's so tight now I can't see past my own arm. But I can hear it breathing. Both sides. At once. If you're listening to this and you're up here on the high ridge in weather like this, turn around now. Don't take the shortcut. The mountain remembers who cheats it. Name's Silas Vance. Folks call me Abe on account of my granddad, and I spent 36 years with the Forestry Commission, mostly up in the high counties where the Appalachian Trail does that long, slow climb above 4,000 feet, and the weather turns on you quicker than a man can zip his coat. I want to tell you about a fella I met. Just the once, and about a rule I broke, teaching him not to break it. It was late October, the kind of October where the leaves have already gone past their color and dropped into a wet brown mat on the trail, and the cold stopped being a crisp kind of cold and started being a kind that gets down in your joints and stays there. I was up doing a trail assessment on a stretch of ridge that don't see but a couple dozen hikers a season, on account of it being remote and on account of the elevation gain being enough to break a man's pace if he ain't careful with his water and his daylight. Now, I got to explain something to you. And I want you to really hear it, because it matters to everything that comes after. A switchback ain't just a turn in the trail. It's an argument with gravity. You can't go straight up a steep face. Not safely, not for long. So the old CCC boys and the trail crews after 'em laid the path back and forth across the slope in long zigzags, each leg graded careful so the water running off don't carve a gulch and a man's knees don't give out on the way down. And here's the thing that day hikers never understand till somebody like me explains it with a shovel in hand. When you cut a switchback, when you see that lower leg of trail 20, 30 feet below, and think you'll just slide down the bank and save the long way around, you ain't saving time. You're opening a wound. Your boots tear the duff and root mat off that slope, and the next good rain carves it into a gully that widens every season after, till you've got a scar that takes machinery and grant money and a decade to heal. if it heals at all. That's the law of the trail, plain and simple. Don't cut the switchback. It's drilled into every ranger, every crew boss, every Eagle Scout that's ever stood at a trailhead kiosk. It's in the pamphlets. It's on the signs. But there's an older version of that warning, one you won't find printed anywhere, one that gets passed down low and quiet from the old-timers to the ones of us willing to listen. My granddad told it to me sitting on a porch with a coal oil lamp between us, and his granddad told it to him before that. He said, in the deep hollows, the unmapped folds where the ridges run close together and the laurel grows thick enough to swallow a man whole, the mountain don't just erode when you cheat its geometry. It compresses. He said the space between the loops ain't fixed up there, not the way it is on a county road or a survey map. It's more like a held breath. And if you go and cut the distance the mountain laid out a purpose, you ain't skipping 100 feet of switchback. You're inviting the mountain to let that breath out. And whatever's been holding its place in that thicket between the loops, whatever's been waiting for the gap to close, it gets to where it can put a hand on both trails at the same time. I didn't believe it. Not really. Not until October. The fella's name was Daniel. Young fella, maybe 26, 27. Decent boots, but not enough miles broke into him. Carrying a pack that was a size too big for the trip he'd planned. I crossed paths with him early that morning at a trailhead. Told him the Weather Service had a fog advisory for the ridgeline come afternoon. Told him to watch his daylight close on account of how short the days had gotten. He nodded the way they all nod, polite, not really hearing it. I went on with my assessment work further down the slope and didn't think on him again till near 4 in the afternoon, when the fog the Weather Service promised came rolling in across the gap like somebody'd opened a door to a freezer. Now I want you to feel what that fog is like up there, because it ain't like fog in a valley. It comes in low and silver white, and it moves, not drifting exactly, more like crawling, spilling over the ridge crest the way water spills over a dam. And within 10 minutes of it arriving, you can't see your own boots clear, let alone the blaze marks painted on the trees that are supposed to keep you on the path. I was making my way back toward the truck when I heard him. Boots scraping, breath coming in short, raw pulls. The particular sound of a man who's been climbing too hard for too long with too little water in him. I called out, and he near jumped out of his skin coming through the fog toward my light. He told me what had happened, breathless, words tumbling over each other. He'd misjudged his pace bad, burned daylight taking photographs and resting his knees. And now the fog had swallowed the markers behind him. His light was getting low. and his hands had gone numb enough he couldn't feel his own trekking pole grips. And he said something that put a cold feeling straight through my chest, worse than the weather. He said he looked down through a gap in the fog, just for a second, and seen the lower leg of the switchback trail almost directly beneath him, maybe 15 feet down a steep dirt bank, thick with loose shale and old leaf litter. And he'd thought about cutting it. I told him not to. I told him straight out, the way I'm telling you now. Don't cut the switchback. Not here. Not in this fog. Not on this mountain. I told him the ground up here ain't stable, that cutting the bank could put him off a drop he couldn't see. I told him to follow my light and we'd take the long way together, the way the trail was laid. He said he understood. He said okay. And then the fog did something I'd never seen it do before in 36 years on that mountain. It thickened sudden, like a held breath letting go, swallowing my light whole. And for maybe 4, 5 seconds, I lost sight of him entirely. When it thinned again, he was gone. And about 30 feet off, down through a notch in the fog where the bank dropped steep and loose, I heard the long, sliding crunch of a man losing his footing on purpose, letting gravity take him down the shortcut he'd promised me he wouldn't take. I want you to understand that I don't blame him. Cold does things to a man's judgment that fear can't undo. He was desperate, and desperate men take the fast way down. He probably figured he'd land on the lower trail, holler up that he was fine, and we'd both have a laugh about it back at the truck. That ain't what happened. I followed his trail down as best I could, calling his name. And when I came over the lip of that bank myself, careful, using a root for a handhold, not letting the mountain catch me the same way, I found him standing on the lower switchback leg, looking around with a face on him I'd only ever seen once before, on a man who's took a wrong step on ice and is still trying to work out which way is down. He said it looked wrong. He said the trail down there looked exactly like the trail up above. Same width, same gravel scatter, same dead rhododendron leaning over the same kind of bend. And for a second he thought he'd somehow slid back onto the same leg he'd left. But the markers were different. And the fog, he said, had gone from silver white to something closer to milk. Total. No shapes in it at all. Just white in every direction. Like he was standing inside a held breath with no edges to it. I told him to stay put, that I'd come down to him. And I want you to know I believed, right up until the moment I myself looked off the next bank, that I could still talk sense into him, and we'd walk out together the slow way. But the fog had its own ideas, and so, I think, did the mountain. He saw the next tier of switchback below us, another loop, another bank, maybe 12 feet this time, and before I could get a hand on his shoulder, he'd gone over it too. Said later he didn't even decide to. Said his feet just went, like the ground itself had tilted underneath him and let him slide. That's when the woods went quiet. Now I need you to understand what quiet means up on a ridge like that, because it ain't an absence you'd notice right off. There's always something. Wind working through the canopy. An owl, maybe, starting early on account of the dark coming on. The tick and settle of branches cooling after a warm afternoon. Small sounds, constant. The kind your ear stops registering because they're always there, same as your own heartbeat. Those sounds stopped. All of them. At once, like somebody had reached out and turned a dial down to nothing. And in that silence, I noticed the trees, the laurel thicket that ran between the two switchback legs. The upper one Daniel had left, and the lower one he'd landed on. It was thick to begin with. The kind of dense mountain laurel that grows so tangled together a man can't push through it without losing skin. But when I looked at it close, using what little I could see through the milk-white fog, I'd swear on my granddad's grave that thicket was narrower than it had been when I'd come over the first bank not 5 minutes before. I measured it the only way a frightened man measures anything in a moment like that. By eye, and by feel, and by the cold certainty settling in my gut. The gap between the upper trail and the lower trail, the gap that should have held 30, 40 feet of slope and brush between it, had closed down to something closer to 20. The trees inside it weren't just close together. They looked pressed. Trunks leaning on trunks that shouldn't have been touching. Branches woven so tight you couldn't have run a hand flat between two of them. The mountain was folding that hollow shut, the way you'd fold a letter to make it smaller. And Daniel and me were standing on the two halves of the page. I called down to him to hold still, to not take another step. And for a moment he listened. I could hear him breathing hard, trying to quiet it. The two of us standing on our separate switchback legs, not 30 feet apart now by my reckoning, though it felt closer. And then I heard it. A click. Metal on stone. The particular sound of a trekking pole tip finding purchase, followed by the slow drag of a boot heel through loose dirt. I figured it was him, shifting his weight, and I near said so. But Daniel's poles were strapped to his pack. He hadn't touched him since the second slide. The sound came again, and this time I placed it proper, and my stomach dropped clean through the soles of my boots, because it wasn't coming from where Daniel stood below me. It was coming from above me, on the trail I'd just left. The same instant it echoed up from somewhere past Daniel on the trail below him. Same click, same drag, same half-second of silence after, like whatever made it was holding its own breath, same as we were. 2 places, 1 sound, at the same time. I tested it. God help me, I tested it. The way you'd test a sore tooth with your tongue, even knowing it'll hurt. I took 2 quick steps sideways along my trail, deliberate, loud as I could manage on that gravel. The click answered. Above Daniel and below me, both at once, matching my rhythm exact, like a shadow that don't bother staying on the ground anymore. I stopped dead. It stopped dead. I waited 4 full seconds by my own count, and on the 5th, just as I went to move again, it moved first. 2 steps, same gait as mine, coming from both directions at once, the laurel between us shivering faint with something passing through it that the wind had nothing to do with, on account of there being no wind left at all. Daniel called up to me, his voice gone thin and small in that dead air, and asked if I'd heard it too. I told him to be still. I told him not to test it again. But the thing in the thicket had already learned our rhythm, and it didn't need either of us to move first anymore. The laurel kept tightening while we stood there, leaves rattling soft against each other, though there weren't a breath of air to move 'em. And I judged the gap between our 2 trails at no more than 6 or 8 feet now, close enough that if Daniel had reached out his trekking pole full extended, he might near have touched the branches on my side of that thicket. That's when the breathing started. Not mine, not Daniel's. Something low and wet and patient, coming from inside the laurel itself, from the narrow, dark seam where the 2 trails had nearly become one. Inches away through the leaves, slow as a thing that's got all the time the mountain can give it. I never saw a shape, not clear, just a warping in the fog where the branches knotted thickest. A darkness that seemed to lean without moving, the way a shadow leans when the light behind it shifts. I told Daniel to climb. Not toward me, not toward him, straight up, away from both legs of that trail, back the long way, the way the mountain meant for him to go. I don't rightly know how he made it. I don't rightly know how I made it neither. I know the breathin' followed us a little ways up that bank, slower with every foot of distance, like it understood the wager and was content to lose this once. We never spoke of it on the drive out, not one word. But I think on it most every fall, when the fog comes crawlin' low across that ridge. And I wonder how many old switchback scars cut into these mountains ain't scars at all. How many of 'em are still foldin', slow and patient, somewhere up past the blaze marks, waitin' on the next tired pair of boots to find the shortcut. So if you're ever up there, and the light's runnin' thin, and you see that lower trail temptin' you through a gap in the fog, don't cut the switchback.